All right, everybody, please remember to like, subscribe, and share. Thank you very much. All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome back to the C Show. I got your boy Chris here, and I have a very special guest with me tonight, Dr. Nick Nalli, who is a senior research scientist with the National Oceanic and Atmosphere Administration. Dr. Nalli wrote the academic article Gunshot Wound Dynamic Models for the JFK uh, Kennedy Assassination in 2018. His work was featured on a Mysteries at the Museum special in 2018 and recorded again later on that year. Dr. Nalli, thank you for being on the show. Welcome, and how are you?
Thank you, Chris. I'm doing well, all things considered. With our current situation, we're still telework full time, and I'm hoping at some point we will get out of that. Before I continue, though, also I have to put up the disclaimer here at the beginning here that the any scientific results or conclusions or any views or opinions that I might express during the course of this interview are those of myself, and do not reflect the views of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration or the Department of Commerce. So I have to put that out there in advance. These are my opinions and views and scientific results and conclusions. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Nalli, first question I have. Working with oceanic, how did that draw you, with your expertise, to the Kennedy assassination as far as writing this gunshot wound?
Yeah, so, I mean, that's a good question. I took interest in the Kennedy assassination as a kid because I'm from a big family. I'm one of 6 boys, and it was one night that they had, and this must have been the Geraldo Rivera showing of the Zapruder film in 1975, but I had no idea what it was. It was just, I saw it. My brothers were in the room. I had 3 older brothers, and I remember them gasping and pointing, "Oh yeah, he's moving. Oh yeah, look at that. Yeah." And I didn't really know exactly what I was looking at. I just knew that it was violent. It looked like his head was being smashed, and it was kind of poor resolution. But I thought that this is Kennedy's crawling out into the back on the trunk. I thought that was actually JFK being thrown back. So it just goes to show you I was very young and had difficulty even understanding what it was. But anyway, that sparked my whole interest in everything over the years. It really started then. But what happened is, so more recently, now that I've gone into mid-career and late career now, my life has settled down, and I've had more time to start looking at things that had interested me in the past, this being one of them. So I started blogging, I don't know, about 10 years ago or something to that effect, anonymously. And I was out there saying to people that, well, the emotion in the Zapruder film of President Kennedy is caused by a recoil effect. And I was adamantly saying this. I had thought about it quite a bit and was convinced that's what it was. And it was finally one time on one of these blogs, somebody points out to me, another anonymous person, that, well, that's, have you read the article by Luis Alvarez in the 70s, 1977 or something to that effect, 1976? He talked about the jet effect. And I was like, no, I'd never heard of him. So I looked into that, found his article, was able to get a reprint of the article and read it, and realized, wow, this guy had already come up with this idea way before I did. But there was some differences, though, in how I was approaching it versus how he was approaching it. I don't want to get into that right at this moment, but it was just letting you know that that's sort of, it really started as a kid, but then later in life, the path that I took in science just happened by coincidence. This is not planned. Just happened to train me in the type of science that is very well applicable to the problem of the gunshot wound dynamics seen in the Zapruder film. It just happened that way. wasn't my plan. But it's, in the nature of a scientist, a research scientist like me, to be always curious about things and to always sort of want to pursue things that are of interest. And so that's sort of what ended up getting me to begin thinking about really putting together a good scientific article and to try to get it published in a peer-reviewed journal.
Okay. I can touch on that in just a second. There's some other things that you mentioned that. One thing I'd like to ask you though is I was reading some of this stuff today, and the article was very good. What is your beliefs, or what is your response? Because I started reading, people saying Nolly got this wrong. Nolly does not know the facts. Nolly is wrong on this right here. Nolly doesn't know what he's talking about. But, what are your replies to that when people say, "Oh, he's wrong. He missed this"?
Well, thanks for I mean, this is good to talk about this. So I published this article, and it was within a month or two that I first saw the first sort of critiques, pushbacks on it from various individuals. And one of them was one of them, Dr. Mantic, he is now, interestingly enough, a topic of discussion because he features in this new Oliver Stone Look Through the Looking Glass movie that has appeared at the Cannes Festival just recently. This is like within the past week. So Mantic has now come back up. And so anyway, he is the one who really, of everything that I've seen out there, his is the only one that's sort of a smart man, an intelligent person who has a background in physics critiquing.
Sorry. I can go back into this. Could you start over when you started explaining that? Because I had a phone call come in and I lost the service there for a second. So could you start back and tell me about when the critique started, or in your responses to them?
Yeah, so it was within a couple months that I started seeing the first critiques to the articles. And I wasn't surprised that I would be seeing critiques, right? I was fully, I was eyes wide open that I was going to see people having a problem with what I had written. And there's a number of them out there, like you say, but the one that was sort of the one that, and by the way, I've read two of them all the way through, and the one of them is by Dr. Mantic. And he is sort of now being talked about because he features in this latest go around by Oliver Stone now, Through the Looking Glass, JFK. He's got a new film that was premiered at the Cannes Movie Festival in France. So I'm sure you are aware of that. This is within the past week. So Dr. Mantic is in this film along with Dr. Wecht and some others as well. So it's Dr. Mantic's. It was his critique that was the most, I think, legit. He has background in physics, and so he wrote up a critique, and basically it was just a lot of stuff, a lot of nitpicking. If you look at it, it's sort of just a lot of nitpicking here, there, and everywhere. I don't know, am I allowed to say 4-letter words on the show?
Yeah, sure, man.
So it was equivalent to throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks, basically. And I read through it, and of everything that he raised, there were about 2 to 3 legitimate points that if he were a peer reviewer, during the peer review, if you were one of the peer reviewers, it would have been very good feedback, in a respectful tone, because that's what a peer review does, is you have other peers who are scientists or specialists review the paper, and then they give you feedback. And the feedback will be criticism, mostly, but not negative, not mean-spirited. It's criticism in the pursuit of truth. So if he had done this and given me that feedback, I could have found a couple of minor issues that were in the paper. One of them was the estimate that I used for the mass of President Kennedy's brain. I came up with an estimate based upon the autopsy mass. So the autopsy mass, I believe, was, gosh, I should know this number offhand. It was rather large to begin with. So the autopsy head mass was already the mass of an intact adult male's brain for a large man. And that was the intact. That's for an intact brain of a live human being, not someone who supposedly had a lot of his head shot away. So, but I wasn't aware of this. I'm not a physician. I'm not a zoologist. So I was not aware of the average size of a male human being's brain. I just took the autopsy mass, assuming it was perfectly accurate, and then I estimated what the intact brain mass would have been. And that actually I used rationale that's found in the book by Donald Thomas. I don't know if you've heard of him, Dr. Donald Thomas, in his book Hear No Evil. He's actually a conspiracy-minded individual, and he's the one who led the charge on the acoustics evidence after.
Oh, yes.
Donald Thomas. Yeah. So in his book, he talked about the intact brain mass, and he came up with a number that was similar to mine, actually. But it turns out the number is too large. It's a much larger brain mass than would be found in reality. But that was something that, again, I didn't cue in on because I'm not a physician. I don't have that expertise. And the peer reviewers were probably physics. They were probably physics specialists who didn't catch it as well. So that was an error in the paper, but it doesn't change the conclusion of the paper, right? So I was able to then fix that. I changed the brain mass, made it smaller, and then reran the calculations. And because of a smaller brain mass, it creates a faster jet. There's less mass, so the momentum is still conserved. So you end up with a higher velocity. And then within the jet, it's called I think it's called the jet equation that I used.
And the body jerks back.
Yes, that's what I'm referring to. That's what it affects too, by the way. So the brain mass came into play in the calculation of the jet recoil effect that I used. And so it turns out that the mass that I used did not impact the final conclusions, right? So, but it is an error that I wish I'd found beforehand. So, but anyway, I wrote up a core agendum, and that's out there now. So that particular error has been corrected, and the results are the same. So, but that's I would say I'm kind of going through with you sort of. I think what I would have considered probably the best or the most the most legitimate criticism that I have found out there.
So I got a question for you. When you mentioned him, because I love the guy. I think he's phenomenal. His voice just puts me in a trance. And I swear, if it was a low-level case where there's no publicity, the one guy if I was on trial, the one guy who I would want to come testify to me about the pathology or whatever would be Dr. Wecht. But if you get him up on some kind of high-profile case, he's just going to go everywhere. What did he say about your article?
So he did not really say anything directly to me. It's just that there were some emails that went around, one from Dr. Gary Aguilar, and Dr. Aguilar has collaborated with Dr. Wecht on some letters to an editor of a ballistics journal that had to do with experiments that Luke Hague had run. So Dr. Wecht, along with Dr. Aguilar, I think, it was basically Dr. Aguilar in email threads who basically said, well, that brain size is too large. Dr. Wecht has performed thousands and thousands of autopsies, and he's never encountered anything that large before. So I think Dr. Wecht was aware in that sense. It was sort of of that mindset as well about the brain being too large. But he has not directly said anything to me. I guess he might have also said something negative at some point, but nothing substantive. Just oh, that's nonsense or something to that effect. Somebody had asked him what he thought of what my conclusions were, and he kind of said, "Oh, that's ridiculous," but he didn't really have any solid explanation as to why. So yeah, so here's my take. Look, Dr. Wecht is very competent and he's credentialed. And same thing with Dr. Mantek, Dr. Aguilar, Dr. Thomas. These are all very intelligent, credentialed people. And I have respect for that. And I have respect for their life's work. But how do I say it? They're wrong about what they're saying. There's a part of me that wonders if whether or not they might even know that they're wrong and just don't want to admit it.
Well, I was fixing to say that it's as smart of as a ministerial is. I think that sometimes they go all in, and if they back out, then they're going to look embarrassed. So they just hold on, like what you just said. They just don't want to admit it.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So, this paper. So, give us kind of a synopsis of it. Of I don't give it all away, but break down. How am I trying to say this? Well, yeah, just give us a synopsis of how you began it. Your scientific research that you put into it, and what you did to lay it out that this is how it happened.
Sure. So really, it really comes down to two crucial frames from the Zapruder film, but it's a couple of frames beyond that too that factor in. But it's those two crucial frames. It's the Zapruder frames 312 and 313. And here's the thing, right? And I emphasize this quite a bit now in casual discussions. It really is nothing short of a miracle that this camera can be used, these photographs can be used in this manner, right? So to be able to use these photographs for the purpose of a forensic type of physical dynamics analysis that I've done is extremely fortuitous. It just happened that Zapruder was standing at the right place at the right time. He was slightly elevated, he's looking down, and the car and the occupants are orthogonal, meaning at a right angle to the field of view of the camera in both of these frames. And what that means is then, as a result, because it's orthogonal, the direction facing the camera is sort of zeroed out, and everything is either to the right or to the left, and you don't have to worry about three-dimensional motion. And so you could treat it as a two-dimensional problem, and the resolution is good enough on the frames where you can take a look and determine what's going on there. Now, of course, there's nothing new here, and of course, I even got some lone, quote unquote, lone nutters out there saying, well, there's nothing new there. But the thing is, I never claimed at any point that there was something new in the observation, right? So the observation of this forward head snap is what I'm talking about now. Between Zapruder frame 312 and 313, we observed that President Kennedy's head kind of moves forward suddenly. It's like a forward snap.
Yeah, you can see it go down about 2 inches.
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct. And it is just about 2 inches. Now, this was known in the 60s, and David Lifton in his book is the one who reports that it was Richard Feynman, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist, who first noticed it. And I actually believe David Lifton's account on this. It just sounds like something that Richard Feynman would have been called in to look at, and that he would have noticed it. So, but all Richard Feynman did was notice it. He just noticed, his head has moved forward. And then Josiah Thompson is become famous because he, with a physics student named Bill Huffman, in his book 6 Seconds in Dallas, He was the first, Josiah Thompson with Bill Huffman, to measure the positions relative to other positions on the limo of the back of his head. So they measured the back of Kennedy's head through like 30 Zapruder frames around before and after this forward head snap. Now, Thompson was looking for the back into the left lurch, right? So he was looking for that. But what he found, and it was not intentional. It was one of these things in life. This is the way it works. He wasn't really looking for this, but he found that forward head snap, and he reports it in his book, and it's measurable, approximately 2 inches. Later on, iTech Corporation also confirmed this, that it was approximately 2-inch forward, or you could say 5 centimeter if you want to be in the metric system here. So it was a forward impulse. So that has been known. But here's the thing. I started restudying this case about 10 years ago, reading stuff. I read Bugliosi's book, read a lot of stuff, and nobody ever really pushed it. It was sort of always acknowledged. Bugliosi acknowledges it. General Posner acknowledges it. They all kind of say, yeah, well, his head moves forward. But none of them ever really push it as, well, but that's a really big deal, actually. This is something that, if studied right and if analyzed correctly, you could say that this is an independent piece of proof of a gunshot from the rear. Just as much a proof or a proof positive as the autopsy evidence was originally. So the autopsy evidence was the evidence that was originally used to determine the rear shot. But this photographic evidence is corroborative and it's definitive. And so that's what I set out to do. That was my intention. And the way you do it in science is you have to do it quantitatively. You can't just kind of say, well, yeah, it moves forward. Yeah, it does. And yeah, common sense would say, yeah, well, that means the shot's from the rear. But still, because, you know, in the training that I've had in my education, the professor would just call that, well, that's called hand waving, is what we call it. Hand waving, meaning hand waving means that you've come up with a plausible explanation, but you haven't really demonstrated it. You haven't really proven anything. You've just kind of come up with something that, yeah, okay, but you haven't really demonstrated it. So the way you demonstrate it is you have to really get quantitative about it. And in this case, what we call a model. You have to try to model it. So that was my intent. That's what I wanted to do. So I was really focused on this forward head snap and trying to model it. And you know, so others have done some modeling. There was, later on, I found out about this guy called Ken Ron, Professor Ken Ron, and he had come up with some simple models himself about this, right? But he did it differently, and what I did was really sort of the very most basic model, which was to come up with what we call the equations of motion based upon Newton's laws. Newton's laws get thrown around a lot as well. People, you hear that people on the conspiracy side of the argument talk about them. Oh, Newton's laws say this, but none of them realize that really the Newtonian mechanics is actually quite hard. It's not something, a lot of these people are sort of stuck in a grade school, like a 8th grade general science sort of understanding of it. But it's actually can get quite complicated quite quickly, actually. And so in this case, though, amazingly, even though it might seem like it's a complicated paper, the reality is it's actually, to a physicist, it's actually pretty simple, actually. Because of the fact that the camera was orthogonal to the car at this point, you could treat it as a 2-dimensional, and that really simplifies things. So that's what I did. I set up the equations that were explicit force equations to try to determine what the effect of a projectile would be on a human head. I modeled the head with skull and a soft tissue interior, and used parameters that I found in the literature. And this is not the JFK literature. This is actually other scientific literature about what the yield strength is of skull bone, what the drag coefficient is of the brain, what the what the drag equation is for the brain. And that's actually where Larry Sturtevant's work comes into play. So Larry Sturtevant actually published some papers that he published some papers. This is before the JFK stuff that he got involved with that talked about what the drag equation is for the tissue of the brain, or because he studied this stuff for military purposes. He was with the Aberdeen. It was all military based stuff. He wanted to see what the effects of rifle gunshots were on human bodies. So that's where that was my intent, was to try to model what the interaction and what the effects of a gunshot wound of that magnitude would be to the human head. After I derived all that, I worked through it very meticulously, and I plugged in parameters, and I did calculations, and I started coming up with the numbers, and the numbers were quite close to what we observe in the Zapruder film. So I came up with numbers that were from, let's say, about 1 to 2 inches forward impulse on his head is what I came up with, which seems a little bit small, but there are reasons that it could have been smaller in my calculations, because I used a simplified model. There were certain things that I wasn't accounting for. Some of the parameters that I was using were just estimated parameters. They could have been off. But in the end, though, going through all this, I was coming up with a magnitude that was quite similar to what we observed. And so what that ends up telling you is, okay, what we observed there between those two frames is consistent only with a shot from behind. And it is consistent with a shot that would come from a Carcano rifle with that type of projectile from the distance of the Texas School Book Depository. That is all consistent with each other. And then that way you can begin to make a more definitive statement about what the frames show. And that's the reason why it was sort of featured suddenly. Certain news media picked it up for that reason. So yeah, anyway, I think hopefully that answers some of that question.
I remember when I'd always say, back into the left, back into the left, back into the left. And I kept listening then, and, like I said, not a physicist, and I'm like, oh, there's no way that's going to happen. You're going to get shot from the back and head, pop back. And then I read this thing, and maybe you can elaborate on it, or if you remember, that they did a test during the Warren Commission where they shot a goat, and it had the exact same reaction.
Yes. Yeah, so that goat is Larry Sturtevant's work, actually.
Was it? That was the first thing that got me to saying, well, okay, I guess, I'm wrong on that.
Yeah, they tested it on a goat, and the goat had a neuromuscular reaction. Stiffened up and kind of fell, but then he went limp. So yes, now that's another interesting topic here, because as I told you a little earlier, I was convinced it was just a recoil effect, and I was telling everybody it's a recoil effect. And then some people would say, well, no, it's neuromuscular, and I was like, nah.
If you don't mind, would you explain to people what recoil effect is?
So recoil is the same thing as what Luis Alvarez called it, a jet effect. It's the same thing. It's just a different term for it, but it just has to do with the fact that it's like the jet. It's, you think of a jet engine or a recoil on a rifle. What happens is, because you have an explosive force or mass that comes out of one end, but not the other, you end up with a motion from the other side that moves in the other direction. Right. So like a jet engine, like a rocket ship, where you're pushing off a mass, you're getting rid of mass very quickly. It causes the rocket to go in the other direction. Now, a lot of people say, well, that's Newton's third law. It is, but really the simpler way of looking at it is it's just called momentum conservation for that system. It's because if you have mass moving in one direction that's being pushed away from let's say the rocket ship or the head or anything like that, then the rest of it has to move the other way to conserve the momentum the system. So really, that's sort of the better, I think, way of looking at it. Yeah, so that's what the jet effect is, the recoil effect, I'll call it. You'll hear me call it recoil effect. But I had thought that it was just a recoil effect. So I was out there for a long time saying it was just a recoil effect. I didn't believe this neuromuscular thing because I just thought, well, how do you know that? I mean, that just seems very speculative. And so but it wasn't until I actually did the calculation in this paper. So that was the second part of the paper, right? I talked about the forward head snap, but then I also tried to calculate the jet recoil effect. And I found that there was a jet recoil. There had to have been a jet recoil effect. There had to have been. But the thing was, the magnitude was not large enough to cause that full back into the left motion. It just was not large enough. And not only was it not large enough, but his whole body is moved back. And so there had to have been some other force at play. It wasn't just a force on the head.
I'm going to cut you off. So there's going to be some conspiracy theorists out there say, well, he was hit, there was a frontal shot, and that forced his body back like that.
Yeah,
what's the probability of that?
That's right. And there are people still saying that even now. And that is wrong. It is an incorrect understanding of the mechanics. This gets right back to very basic classical mechanics, Newton's laws. Everybody wants to talk about, F equals ma, Newton's laws. Yeah, but you have to understand what all that really means. And so the whole idea of F equals ma is that it acts instantaneously on particles, and it's localized, right? So So when there's a force on the head, let's say, and you can even test this yourself. Just do a push on your head, in the back of your head, and see what happens. It's your head that moves. It's not your whole body that moves. Now, eventually, your whole body might move. So you might think of a boxer throwing a good left hook, and it hits the guy in the head, and what happens is his head moves, and you can watch it in slow motion. His head will move first, and then maybe if there's enough force, it'll yank the neck, and then it'll sort of tug the body a little bit. But the force itself is not on the body, it's on the head, and the head is what moves. And what we would say in classical mechanics is the force acts like it's acting on the center of mass. So it's always, in classical mechanics, you were always working in terms of the center of mass to simplify things. So any gunshot wound effect on the head will act on the center of mass of the head. And then if there's enough force behind it, then it might yank the body along a little bit with it through the neck. But the body is much more massive, and the momentum is the product of the velocity and the mass. The force is proportional on the mass. So if the higher the mass, the less acceleration you're going to get from that force. So this idea that the gunshot hit him in the head and then caused that whole backward lurch in the entire body, no, the bullet does not have enough. No bullet has that much momentum to do that. There's no bullet.
What would be the scientific probability that shot from the knoll caused the head snap and the body to move? Or chances, or just
zero.
Zero?
Yes.
Like not even a 1% chance, or 0.1?
It is not even 0.1.
Wow.
Maybe you could say, I don't know, you could say maybe 0.0000001% or something like that. So 1 to the negative 8%, something like that maybe. I wouldn't even give it that. I would say it's zero, really. Because it's what you observe there in the zapruder can only come from a gunshot wound from the rear. It cannot be a gunshot wound from the front that causes this. And what I'm talking about is between 312 and 313, which is where the bullet impacts, right? So that's another thing to keep in mind is I talk about this quite a bit, is the time scales. So we know about physics. Most people, I think you probably know that physics is kind of divided up into large regimes physics is divided up into 3 different big regimes. One being the relativistic regime, which is sort of general relativity, special relativity, and that's for anything that moves at the speed of light, close to the speed of light, or anything that's extremely massive. All right, and what I mean by extremely massive is like a black hole. Then you have the very small microscopic domain, and that's where you need to have quantum mechanics. But then for what we call everyday phenomenon on the Earth, and including orbital mechanics, the Earth's rotation around the sun, the motion of comets, the motion of cars, the motion of a baseball, the motion of rockets, these are all fall within what's called the classical domain, which is basically the Newtonian physics domain. And within the Newtonian physics domain, everything acts instantly. A force has an instant effect, causes an instantaneous change in acceleration on a mass. So that is what you have to take into account. And here's the thing. A bullet falls squarely within the Newtonian domain. So meaning that you don't need relativity to talk about it. So even though the bullet moves so really fast, right? If you slow your frames down, if you get a slow motion camera and you're able to watch that bullet move really slowly with the slow motion camera, you can use the Newtonian physics just like you could for slower moving objects. And so what that means is if you want to see what the bullet's going to do, you have to get right down to that time scale. You have to get down to the time scale, and the time scale is minuscule, right? So the bullet passes very quickly through JFK's head because it is a rifle and it has an extremely high speed. And so it took about approximately, if you assume that it was 11 centimeters through his head, the actual trajectory through the head, that would have taken about 0.3 milliseconds, or about 0.0003 seconds to get through. If you want to know what the bullet is going to do using Newtonian mechanics, you have to examine what's happening within that period of time, because that's the period of time where it is interacting and creating forces, creating a force. And so that means anything that goes on after Zapruder frame Z313 doesn't matter. That's not due to a bullet, because the bullet is long gone at that point. It has come to rest and is not interacting with his head anymore. It is not doing anything. There's no forces caused by it. The forces all happen between Zapruder frame 312 and 313. So it's really those two frames that you have to look at to get an understanding of what the bullet actually did. And so that's the reason why. That's why I say it's a 0% chance.
And yeah, I agree too. I guess, I'm guessing this would go part of the side of physics. Is I remember noticing this little kid, still a Garrisonite, and the back to the left. But then when I looked at the headshot, and you see all the matter is sprayed through the front of his head.
Yes. You raise it. Bingo. Yes, exactly.
So when I'm looking at there and all the matter and all the blood is sprayed through the front of his head, there's nothing coming out of the back.
Yep. That is another indicator, right? So that's another indicator the shot is from behind. No doubt about that, right? So, but I mean, it's further indication that there was a forward head snap as well, because in Josiah Thompson's, Tink Thompson's new book, he tries to dismiss that forward head snap as a blur illusion caused by the blurring on the film. That's a whole other can of worms. We won't get into that right now. But he tries to dismiss it as that. But what I try to say is, well, no. Even if you want to say the back of his head is a blur illusion, which is the very back line of his head. But it doesn't matter, though. You still see a whole mass of tissue that's forward, right?
I mean, it's just sprayed forward. I mean, it's just, yeah.
Right.
And a guy tried to explain to me one night, he said, the reason that happened was because our air circulation pushed the matter forward. I said, how in the hell does air circulation follow behind the bullet and forces all this brain matter forward? That is, man, that's the stupidest thing I've ever
So
heard.
that's the magic air puff theory there, because he's saying that the puff of air that would have blown that was moving at the speed of the bullet. Now, I've never heard of that, okay, and I've actually studied
he said it was
atmosphere
the air
science.
circulation of the car.
Oh,
There.
well, that's what I mean
When
is...
he got hit with a bullet.
But the car was going, 8 miles per hour?
Yeah. So our air circulation forced all this massive amounts of blood out, and I was like, well, how does that still? I said, well, how would that explain if he got shot from the front and the air circulation would force everything back to the front? I said, that makes no sense.
No, that makes no sense. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Well, one thing I wanted to say too, I'm sorry, I always like my guests talk most, but I pointed out something to people sometime who talk about, the back of the president's head blasted out. And I'm like, well, okay, from where he was firing at, if there's a grassy knoll shot, I said it would have basically taken Kennedy on the right side of the head, enters, and would have had to take a left and then blow the back side of his head out. That's one magic bullet.
Absolutely right, too. That's right. So the grassy knoll, I'm sure you've been to Dealey Plaza. I know that, right?
Yeah.
How many times?
And I went
how many times
last
have you been
summer,
there?
I'm sorry?
How many times were you there?
That's my first time to go.
Okay,
and,
that was your first time. So you were there in the grassy knoll, right?
Well, the first place I went I went and I stood on the triple overpass.
Okay.
Well, first thing I got to Dealey Plaza, and I was looking around. I was like, where's the where's Dealey Plaza at? This is just like a a little like thing set up. People come look at. I can't remember what I'm looking for, but like a stage or something. A prop. And I was like, where's it at? I was like, it's so small. And so the first thing I did is I went and I stood on the triple overpass. And I looked at where SSM Holland seen the puff of smoke. And I was looking behind the picket fence. And I was like, I can see all the way back there. So then I went and stood behind the fence. And somebody pointed out the Lee Bowers Tower. And I was like, God, he is so close. He could have seen the color of their socks.
Uh-huh.
And then, I started realizing, things started getting to me. Then I'm like, you're not going to put sniper teams in everywhere in Dealey Plaza. What if when the wrong team gets caught? What if they all get caught? I mean, you got yourself in a whole situation then. So that's when I really started moving away from these other things. I was like, there's just, no way. And I can't. Another thing too, sorry, I should be letting you talk, is every investigation came back to and agreed that 3 shots, school book depository, Oswald.
Mm-hmm. Yep, they did. And for good reason, of course. And you're still there, right?
Yeah, I'm listening to you.
Okay, yep. So you've been to the Dealey Plaza and you've observed a lot of things about it. And I'm gonna ask you this now. I'm not the interviewer, but I'm going to ask you. So I'm sure you went up to the sniper's nest area. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you took a look down the street. I know you can go up to the top floor to do this. Now, and you were former military, right? What was it, Marine Corps? Or?
No, I was in the Army. I was in
good. Okay, good. Army, yes. So, yeah, my wife's in the Army, too. Was in the Army.
And me and Oswald were about even, pretty much as even as you could be on the scorecards. We were both sharpshooters. We both scored well.
Okay, so you scored as the sharpshooter, and so did that look like an impossible shot to you? Did it look impossible?
Well, first of all, let's say things that and I know Oswald went up to 500 meters, but when we were out there on our silhouettes firing on rifle ranges, we went up to 300 meters. That shot right there was less than the final shot. The headshot was at 188 meters. That car was on basically a stationary target moving away from you.
Mm-hmm.
When I looked out that window and I seen that angle, I thought I could make this shot in my sleep. I mean, how this myth is developed of he couldn't make the shot was impossible. I don't know. I don't know where that came from. But you're talking about a Marine or even an Army guy from 88 meters. That is a cake shot all day long.
Exactly. Well, there you go. And you were trained that way, and it's a good thing you're trained that way. So, yeah, I think part of the confusion with that comes with the fact that the limousine was moving, but people got to remember that it was moving away, like you said, on a downslope, and it was moving very slow.
It's basically like you'd be shooting a stationary target. You just leave it just a tad. People who want to say that the easiest shot was coming up Houston. No, it wasn't, because you're trying to track a moving target.
Yes.
And you can't do that. Same thing when here's something else I like to point out that I can blow the whole knoll shot out is impossible. Is with two things. First, well, anybody could have seen him. Second, he would have been in a prone, unsupported position, which means there was no place to rest his elbow and get a good shot. And now he is tracking a target that is moving towards him.
Mm-hmm.
It's impossible. You can't do it.
It was a more difficult shot, actually, from the grassy knoll. It was more difficult.
It was possible. Yeah. I mean, I'm going to say it's impossible to make
but
to get a clear headshot, yes, that's not going to happen.
It was more difficult. It would have been more difficult from that.
Oh, it would be more difficult.
Yeah.
They'll say they say that Oswald's first shot that he missed, it was the easiest shot. No, it wasn't. It was coming down almost right up under him. He was pointing down. Again, in an unsupported position, so he couldn't stable his elbow. And I just think he pulled jerks it, and missed.
Yep, that's exactly, I think, what happened as well. That's what I think happened, yeah. And I'm going to just quickly comment that this is another thing about the whole JFK assassination that is something that, again, the specific science that I got involved with is very well trained me to think about things, because even let's say instead I was a theoretical physicist or an experimental laboratory physicist. Even then, I don't know that the training is as good, because in a laboratory you have control over the variables and everything's sort of set up, and there's a lot of things that are well controlled by you. The same thing in theory as well. If you're just a theoretical physicist, everything is perfectly beautiful and symmetric and all this, right? But the Earth, let's say, the real world, let's say, isn't like that, right? So I've been trained pretty well with that, right? So atmospheric science, there is no laboratory. There's laboratories for certain things like the gas laws and things like that. But when we're studying like weather systems or climate, there's no laboratory. The laboratory is the Earth itself and what it does. And if you take a look at things, there's no repeat, right? Clouds, for example, themselves are extremely complex. They have complicated formations and morphologies, and no two of them are the same. Nevertheless, we can model them, right? We can have a definite model. We can have something called a cumulus cloud, a cirrus cloud. Even better example is hurricanes, right? So hurricanes we have models for. We're pretty good at understanding what causes a hurricane and what's going on and the energy that goes into it and how they work. Nevertheless, each hurricane is unique and different. There's no two that are the same. They're all got their own little thing about them that makes them a little different. They all do a little bit different things. And that's sort of the same thing here, right? It's in the JFK assassination, it's like that. So there's a lot of little nuances, a lot of little oddities.
Perfect storm.
Yeah. Well, it's a perfect storm. Yes, and there's a lot of little oddities about it that are unique, and you can't repeat them. So now there's this standard from people who believe there's a conspiracy out there who are saying, well, this magic bullet. Well, look, you go on the internet now, and you can find Discovery Channel. They set it up, and they almost exactly produced that magic bullet. I don't know if you've seen it. They shot it
They have
through.
them up there they have like two, not like Jello things or something, but things where they can fire through people, and they're up there on the trying to replicate everything that happened in Dealey Plaza that day, and they have two of them lined up, and they pretty much replicate the shot. I don't know if that's the one you're talking about, but yeah, I've seen something like that.
That's exactly it, right? So that's it. They set it all up. They had tissue simulants, and they had bodies, and kind of simulate the two bodies, and they're arranged a certain way, and they used the exact same ammunition, and they fired the bullet through, and it almost perfectly duplicated what happened in Dealey Plaza. But I say almost, because it wasn't perfect. There's a little bit difference. The bullet had a little bit more damage to it.
Yeah, you can never duplicate, something like that.
That's exactly, and that's what they don't get, that you can't exactly duplicate. And what that means when you say that, you have to, what is the implication, what we just said? You can't exactly duplicate it. It means that there's oddities about it. There's certain things that are unusual about it that won't be repeated and seem non-textbook, seem weird, or seem a little odd. One of them is the single bullet. Seems to be like, who would have ever predicted this? How would the assassin himself, Lee Harvey Oswald, did not think, well, I'm going to shoot both of them through and through, and it's going to hit him in the wrist. No.
Well, you know what? I think that Oswald knew that how powerful a rifle that was. If he hit Kennedy in the right place, he would probably go through and get Connolly. And I think that, could be just thinking here. I think that probably weighed heavily on his mind that, because about his Marine Corps discharge, he thought, why not get 2 for 1?
That could very well be. And there's no way we would know that. And it certainly could be. So that's possible. But what isn't is there's no way he would have, or anybody would predict exactly how it went, what happened, right? So exactly how the fact that it went through both, and then it lands, it injures him in the wrist, and the bullet itself comes out with minimal damage, but damaged, but not very much. And it's just very difficult. I mean, it won't ever happen again. They tried it.
Not in a million years.
Yes, you know what I mean? So, and that's what but then as a result, they think, well, that means it didn't happen. No, things like that happen all the time in the real world. Odd, bizarre things, because the real world's like that. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is, so that's another thing that when I come to this case, everything makes sense to me, because I'm thinking, but this is the way it is, I mean, no two hurricanes are the same. If you went to any particular hurricane, you'd find all sorts of little odd things. If you really dissected the way these people dissect things, you would find that there are oddities about it, right? That seemed weird. But it's only because it seems weird, but it's not weird. It's just reality. It's the real world's complicated. Yes, that's right.
It's good. And people, if they would just watch this proof film, and I don't know how you pay attention to it, but you can see Kennedy and Connolly react at the same time.
Yes.
And even Dr. Wecht, who, disputes the single bullet theory, during the London trial, he admitted that it would have to have come within a fraction of a tenth of a second.
Dr. Wecht.
And that's what, I don't know if you watched it. That's when Billy Osty said, well, how'd they do this? Was looking at a time watch and, space and time, or, how do you, pull that off? But that's almost impossible there in itself, that you're going to get a shot that hits within a fraction of a second.
That seems very unlikely. It seems unlikely to me, but it's just easier. It's more simple to say it's one bullet that caused it. And even you, like you said, you even think that Lee Harvey Oswald himself might have known that, using a full metal jacket military rifle bullet, goes through one body. It goes through more than one body. I mean, everybody acts like there's some major, whoa, that doesn't happen. Yeah, it does. Anyway.
And I actually, like, when I first got in this, I was, and I don't know if you remember me then or if I started changing, I was the, conspiracy king, Oswald was set up, Cubans were involved in it. Let's say, other things I had, other shooters and stuff like this. You never would have convinced me that the single bullet theory was real. I never thought I would admit there was that there was not a second shooter on the grassy knoll. And some guys like Patrick Collins and Martin Kelly, just other guys. I don't want to name names, so I'll leave somebody else. I could have been like some of these other guys on these forums and just got mad and took my ball and went home because I didn't want to listen to it. But I said, well, no, so I'm going to listen to this. So I started reading what they was giving me and reading the stuff. And then finally, started changing. And then I remember when I realized, okay, there's no knoll shot. And then I said, but they'll never be able to convince me there was, single bullet theory is true. Well, they've never offered me anything to prove that it wasn't true. And, stuff like, so it was just things like that got my mind clicking, and it took a while. It was a long journey, but I finally reached the point to where I believe Oswald was 100% guilty in both murders. I can't rule out that when I say this about conspiracy, that there could have been the Mexico City trip, some rogue element puts a seed in his head that thinks he's going to get away and live in Mexico. I can't rule that something like that out happen. And I guess that would equate conspiracy. But as far as like the government being involved and stuff like that, no, I no longer hold those views.
Well, welcome to. You've just landed both feet solidly on the ground, or not just now, but when you kind of came to these realizations, you've kind of really come to the reality of the situation based upon objective evidence, and that's how we learn about the world. So that it's good. Kudos to you. And was it terribly painful? Was it really awful?
Oh my God! It was like a death in the family. It was like it was like a 6-year-old kid being told there's no Santa Claus. Man, I was in a depression, and I was like, no, this can't be true. This is not right. And then finally, I guess it comes down to a point. And I think some guys, especially with the conspiracy theorist guys, that they know deep down that probably that what people are saying is correct, but they're too stubborn to admit it. And
I think so.
That's just not me. I mean, I just if I'm wrong, I'm gonna come out and say I'm wrong. And at that time, I had to come out and say, I no longer believe that that Oswald was innocent. I mean,
well, it's interesting that you say what you said about the pain factor. There are two different things here, right? So one is, and this happened to me, because I also believed there was a conspiracy at first. I was much younger, though. This is when I was much younger. When I read the Warren Commission report, I realized that, oh my God, no, there's too much here, too much evidence. It's too detailed. It's very meticulous. And I realized that, no, it looks like it was this lone assassin who did it. And of course, I don't know if you've read the entire Warren Commission report, but the whole flavor of it is, well, he he was like this, and he was his mother, and he didn't really have a clue, and they really portrayed him, and they didn't do this intentionally, but it's there. If you read it, you just see this sort of undercurrent was that
I've read bits and pieces of it.
he, if I mean it's meticulous, it's good, but it's all stuff you know. I mean, that's the thing is, if you read Posner and you read, it's stuff that you've already known, but you got to remember, I didn't read Posner. I didn't read anything. I just saw the movie JFK by Oliver Stone, and then I read the Warren Commission report. And the Warren Commission report just really laid it out, and I realized, okay, this was the work of this one guy, and the way they portrayed him, it just seemed like, well, what the hell? He shot him, but he didn't really know why. Even he just did it for the hell of it. That's kind of the takeaway. But the thing is, but evidence is evidence, data is data, reality is reality, facts are facts. And I just like, okay, well, that's what happened. It doesn't matter how I feel about it. For some reason, the guy did it for the hell of it. And I left it at that. Now, that was a really bitter taste. That, I know what you mean. So when I came to that realization, I realized, God, there's something horrible about that. There's really something terrible about that. It's like I prefer that it was a conspiracy. That's nicer.
Well,
you know
I
what
think
I mean?
human mind. I mean, a conspiracy like this is more sexy, and I think the human mind craves a mystery.
Yes.
I mean, what's more intriguing? A communist that comes out here and involved in conspiracy with Cuban mercenaries and kills the president, or a 24-year-old know nothing that gets out there and gets a lucky shot off and kills, the free leader of the world. People are going to be more interested in the conspiracy side. I mean,
Definitely that. Yes. So there's that part of it that was sort of difficult. I'll admit it was like a tough pill to swallow, right? And by the way, I'm not saying that's the way I feel about it now. I'm just saying, talk about the conversion experience. The negativity was this realization that some guy just did it for the hell of it, and that was difficult to digest. All right, but that said, the realization was not really that big a deal. It wasn't some major ego blow. It wasn't like, I mean, what's the big deal? I used to get in arguments with my father about it. He would tell me that's Lee Harvey Oswald, and I'm like, no, it was a conspiracy. And even the House Select Committee on Assassination said it was. And I argued with him, argued back and forth. Then I read the Warren Commission report. I realized, I read it, I digested it, and I realized by the time I got to the end of it, okay, I got to tell him. So I went to him and I told him, Dad, I think you were right. I read this Warren Commission report. I think you were right all along. He's like, yeah, I was. But the thing is, it wasn't that big a deal. So I'm just saying, any of the people who believe there's a conspiracy, it's not a big deal to just say, well, that's what I thought, but I was wrong, and it's no biggie. Anyway.
And like I said, and I still hold out there may have been maybe a 5% chance of conspiracy. I mean, could there have been of some people met him? Hey, take this shot. We'll get you out of here. I don't know. Is it possible?
Absolutely. Actually, I agree with you. I agree with you. I can't rule out. I don't know that he was alone. I'm not convinced that he was, but he didn't, though. That's the reality.
100%. And one of the things, like I was talking to somebody about that, they said, what are some things that you can't say, admit it? And I said, it's just some minor things. It's like, when he runs home and he gets his weapon and he's walking down the streets. What was he doing? I mean, where was he headed? He was headed somewhere. You can't tell me he was just walking around the streets to wait till he got picked up. And those are there's minor things I can't let go.
I agree with you on that as well. I think that he had a plan, but I think it's another topic to get into. But I will tell you that I don't necessarily think he was alone, but I don't know either way really. Just that we just you just have to know that, well, he's the guy who did it, though. Just like John Wilkes Booth wasn't alone, right? So John
Right.
Wilkes Booth was part of a conspiracy, but he's the one who shot Lincoln, and he's the guy who did the wet work. It's the same thing here. It's the same thing. Who knows? It's something that I'm interested in, though.
Well, I've always loved it. And this right here, I'll tell you, this was a really fascinating interview. The way, I've tried to bring in different people with the expertise in that in the case. Talk to me about it with knowledge, and just to have this right here is absolutely awesome. I mean, the scientific part of it is something that draws me to it, and I think this has been a very good hit. I was mesmerized or caught up in it the whole time. I really enjoyed it.
I'm really glad to hear that. Excellent. I'm really glad to hear that. If my wife were in the room, she'd be rolling her eyes. She'd be thinking, okay, there he is. He's in his element. He loves to lecture. So, but it's good when I get a captive audience like you. And so I'm glad it wasn't terrible.
About boring or something. I think you'll get a very captive audience on this right here. I mean, because like I said, I've had people explain, this and this and this in the interviews, but I've never had somebody explain, the recoil and the science behind it. So, I mean, I actually, I love this. I think it'll be great. Is there anything else you want to add before we close out? I mean,
no, that's good, Chris. I enjoyed this very much. Thank you for the opportunity, and I'm glad that we had a nice conversation here.
I love that, Dr. Nalli, and I'd love to have you back on again sometime. And
yeah, sure, we can do that.
And thank you for coming back in, because I really enjoyed this. And like I said, there's some other topics I think you again, but otherwise, thanks for coming in, and we will talk soon.
Very good. You have a good night now.
You too.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay. Oh, all right, man. I really enjoyed that.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So I cut that. So yeah, dude, that was awesome. That was one of the best ones I've did.
Okay. Well, no, that's good. I'm really glad to hear that. I will tell you that. It was really seeing the interview you had with Fred Litwin that sort of really made me think, I'd like to do that. That'd be great. Because I watched his interview, and I realized that he was very polished. He knew his stuff. And I thought, okay, yeah, I'd like to do that. So anyway.
Me or Fred?
Fred Litwin's interview was good. You did a good job too. You did a good job interviewing him.
I know what you meant by polished. And
so an interviewer is got to, Well, I mean, you were doing a good job at the interview too, but he was very eloquent himself. But you were good as well.
I love Fred. Fred's my favorite people.
Because the interviewer has to keep the conversation going, and so that's a very difficult job. And I'm always appreciative, because they're the ones who have to sit there and listen and be able to keep it moving and keep the guy talking. And so if you can do that, you're successful at interviewing.
And I didn't know, because I tell you what inspired me about this a few months ago. Bill McIntosh. When I was listening to some of his stuff, and I was like, man, that sounds like fun. I was like, I'm gonna try that. So I started doing JFK Civil War interviews. I thought, how far could I expand it out? And people tell me, I said, you're Bill Brown played on time. You're an excellent interviewer. I said, you think so? And he said,
yes.
He said, you come up with great questions and stuff. So I was like, man, that really made me feel good. So I mean, that's why I tried to do.
Good questions, exactly. No, they're good questions, and you got me talking. And that's that's the whole essence. You want me to sit there and talk a lot, but then you got to carry it. You need to talk a little bit too. It can't be. By the way, so you were fine. The fact that you were talking was good too, because it can't just be
Yeah, my thing is I want it to be 20% me talking and then 80% you.
That's about right. Yeah. That's about right. Yeah. Because ultimately it's an interview, but it's like a conversation too. Really, is kind of what it is. So I think it was the right balance, and it was good. I think you're good at doing that. I hope that you get views on it, and I like that. I hope that I hope that you get more attention because of your shut up.
Oh my God, dude. I, I was, brother, I was like, I didn't expect that coming. If you ever get a chance, watch the whole interview. It's about an hour and a half or something. Watch it
Okay.
from the beginning to end, and you can see when this is going on. I guess baiting him because, and I was sitting there and asking him stuff and baiting him, and he just so he gets tired of me cutting him off, and I'm like, wait a second, I'm cutting you off because I'm trying to make sure I'm understanding you right. And then he goes, I'm fixing to really get cross with you. I said, well, I don't care if you get cross with me or not. And that's when he just, shut up. And
All I know is that's good theater. I mean, that it's good that you extracted it and put it on there because that's the type of thing you might get attention. It's just good to lure people in with that type of thing.
oh, I got so many subscribers just from that right there. I mean, like he's one of the stars of the show, and one of the I'm Facebook friends with this lady, and she's an assistant district attorney in uh out in Oklahoma or Nevada or somewhere, and she said that they were in that morning and there was lawyers, prosecutors, and judges was in there, and she played it for them. And she said they was just rolling, and they said I don't know how that guy kept a straight face, and so they kept sitting there talking, and Mandy said, that was her name. She goes, he would be a great witness, and the judge said, depends on who for. It depends on for who. She goes, what do you mean? And he said, what do you mean? He said, that's the guy that will never blink in a game of who blinks first. He will, he will get a interrogator so mad that they would be beside themselves. He said, so it depends on who you want him to be a witness for.
Right? Exactly.
Yeah,
All
I
right.
have a lot of fun on this. Before I let you go, but yeah, I'd like to go back on with your oceanic stuff. That'd be some good stuff that I'd like to talk about.
Yeah, I'm that. There's plenty of things that we can do in another interview, and I'm all for that. Yeah, so I'd be glad to do it. We'll just wait for a little bit of time here and try to schedule another one.
Sure, man.